Okay. This
Okay.
is test number 3.
Okay, this is test number 3. So I was thinking, when we go ahead and start addressing DE slash Steve slash Scott slash Reb, uh, should we just be like, hey guys, we love the crap out of you, and we got opinions, and you know what they say about opinions, right? Everyone has them. Well, we're putting it on. We're putting it on words. We're putting them in a. We're putting them in a recorded, controlled setting that has been organized so that we can go point by point as to why we
Have the opinions
hate
you have.
hate the shit out of it. Nah, why we love your game and why what things we would like you guys to do.
Or
Stop it right there.
maybe not like what you should do, but like, hey, here's a thought process you should consider. And these
Yeah.
are ideas that we came up with that are like actual actionable things that we're not expecting you to do, but it's a part of the thought
And
process.
it's almost would you label it as would you label it almost as like a litmus test for what you predict or hope you would see at TennoCon?
No, because I kind of know what we're going to see at TennoCon. If
Oh,
they talk about this, that's a different story. But like the big presentation, I don't know if they will talk about difficulty.
yeah. So you're like, oh yeah, DE extremely predictable developers. I know what they're gonna do.
Well, I know what they're not going to do. That's the difference.
It's like I know we are not switching over to an engine. We're making Destiny 2. I mean Warframe 2. Um, so what are the problems of Warframe that you want to start addressing first?
Okay. Considering that it's the first thing on our list, and
Okay.
it helps us ease into the main point,
All right.
we're going to talk about armor scaling.
Okay. Uh, armor scaling is a known issue that I would
Well,
say. What? Let me say this. I would say it's a known issue, right, by both the developers and the player base that has been with the game for a long time, right? Because a new player wouldn't necessarily be like, "Oh yeah, this is an issue," because they're not necessarily tackling that problem.
but I don't even necessarily know if that's true,
Okay.
that people have a problem with it anymore. Because people had a problem with it at one point, and then uh, this is the part of that we were meant to talk about.
Hmm.
And like the 90% of what we're going to say has to do with difficulty and challenge in Warframe,
Hmm.
because while the learning curve for Warframe is insanely steep, the actual gameplay difficulty doesn't go up. The math goes up, and the first example of that is armor scaling.
Yeah, and that's like the difference between, let's say, the examples that we've talked about before, which are, instead of just being like an interesting fight, right? Like in Dark Souls or in Vermintide, you just get a super tanky enemy, and you're just like, okay, I just got to hit this thing with more math and more math,
Yeah,
but it's not necessarily like an interesting
and
fight,
we're not talking
right?
about boss fights specifically. We're talking
No,
about just the factions of enemies.
yeah, like it's the whole issue with like if you encounter, let's say, one of the new amalgams, they sound cool when they show up, but you fight them the same as everything else. You just wail on it and then that's it, right? Like there's realistically no gameplay changes that you're having to do on yourself to beat that thing. Like the
Yeah,
closest thing to that would be what you've mentioned before, which is the what's it called, the thing with
nullifier,
the nullifier. There we go. The nullifier. You shoot the bubble, bubble goes away, or you shoot the little drone above the nullifier,
or you
bubble goes
blitz
away, then
into
you
the
kill the
bubble
thing. Or
and hope that you don't get shot and just kill the nullifier outright.
yeah,
But there's at least a split second there where you're like, it's a nullifier. I'm going to kill it this way
Yeah, like
instead of just kind of like the mindless gameplay that can come from people who have gotten situated with
yeah, because
Warframe.
like most players in Warframe at this point have gotten used to just
Those players
wailing
who've
on
been
everything.
around specifically.
Yeah, most players have been around and like they are
They need
either
to
good.
specify a lot of things.
Yeah, but most players, right? Most veteran players of Warframe are either already well kitted out when they go into a mission with what Warframe they're going into it with. Say like a Nova, a slow Nova or a Saren, and they're gonna be good no matter what weapon they really bring. They're just gonna be like, here you go, wham, or they're gonna bring a weapon that they know can handle anything. Like for me, that's my Redeemer Prime. Like I can have anything else equipped, but I always have like a something like a Redeemer Prime with me in case, let's say, a Nox shows up and he won't die right away. All I got to do is just point my cannon at him, blast him, and it doesn't just shatter his face shield. It just erases him from
Yeah,
existence, and all that's left is him wailing on the like as he dies.
yeah.
But
And
that
my equivalent would be my Tonbo, which is just unnecessarily powerful
yeah,
because it's a slash status procking weapon. So that basically kills everything because slash bypasses armor, which goes back into the armor scaling thing that we're starting on. Because when I remember a time when there were some people in the Warframe community who were saying armor scaling is bad and there should be a theoretical cap.
mhm,
And that theoretical cap never happens. Instead, as time went on, we more ways of dealing with armor were introduced into the game instead of actually addressing the fact that armor
just keep scaling.
it makes yeah, just scales so hard to the point where eventually enemies become
Yeah,
difficult because you can't kill them and not because they are
like I
difficult to kill. Because you kill a level 150 bombard the same way you
yeah,
kill a level
like in
15
my
bombard.
mind, uh when it comes to Warframe and a lot of the things that we would like to start seeing changes on, they're more than likely relics of the past, right? Like design
Yes.
wise, right? Like the procedural generation was done just because investing time on building levels is expensive. It's not only really time consuming, but it's costly monetary wise. And for DE when they were making Warframe, it was their last chance. It was like their dead or alive moment when they had to succeed at that moment or that was it. So they had to rely on a lot of things that at this point look like crutches because the armor scaling with how beautiful the game looks and the world that's basically being painted for us, you would imagine that they would scale difficulty in a more interesting way because it might for example, in my mind, when I think of what they could do with, let's say, the factions, the three main factions, which are the Grenier, the Infested, and the Corpus. In my mind, I believe the Corpus are like, as of now, the most unique ones, and you've agreed with me already,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Specifically
okay,
the new wave like Orb Valis Jupiter Corpus. If we're going to be specific. Like the
yeah,
Corpus generally speaking I think are the most interesting, but more specifically the newest versions of the Corpus
yeah,
with kind of like the revamped sounds and animations and then like some of the melee units being like a little bit more potent and
yeah,
then on top of that how as you scale up threat level for example in Orb Valis the enemies gain traits because the traits are modular across certain enemies. Like certain enemies can gain nullifier bubbles, and certain the MOAs can then gain a mortar attack, and that doesn't always
mhm,
happen when you go from say 1 star to 2 stars on the
yeah,
threat level system. Like the new wave of Corpus, and I'll throw the amalgams in there just because the new wave of Corpus is the most interesting collection of enemies that exists right now. And I want to pin down the armor scaling thing before we start rambling off into things about progression and the weapon hierarchy and like the core of how all this comes together, which is
Okay.
the current enemy design. Uh, Armor scaling, the reason why we see it as a problem is because, well, one, because of the lack of interaction that armor has, right? Like we were saying how I was saying how you kill a level 15 bombard the same way you kill a level 150 bombard, but that makes sense because it's the same type of enemy. So what if I were to say you take a heavy gunner who's level 15 and compare it to a level 150 bombard?
Well, I think
You still kill those guys the same way, and the armor scaling creates a problem where Warframe's difficulty is not based on
yeah.
the
Well, that's the
actions
whole reason
of
for
the
which
enemies. It's based on
I'm also
math.
trying to basically bounce between our points because I think that everything is intrinsically connected.
Yeah, but I want to, like, we can connect everything as we go. You know,
Okay.
wait, like I'm just starting with the armor scaling because it's a really like basic. Like armor scaling is adding additional math on top of health bars to make health bars exponentially larger,
Okay. So peel.
specifically for armored
All
enemies.
right. So peel the onion. What is it that you would like to see with armor scaling?
A theoretical cap to the damage reduction it provides,
Okay.
which that damage reduction cap could be like 96% damage reduction cap or something of the sort. Like, and when we're talking about this, right, we are aware of the existence of endless missions that you can sit in for hours
Hmm.
and like play forever. You may think, oh, what that would make those missions have like that would make going past like an hour into a survival right infinitely easier because of that eventually you get to the point where the armor
Yeah.
caps off. But this is addressed by further points we're going to make about the weapon hierarchy and uh, unique enemies and how to make them more unique than they currently are. Like we're starting with the armor scaling because it's a really simple concept. It's math that doesn't need to be infinite,
So
right? Which then the problems that would be created by capping it off would then be alleviated by doing other things to other parts of the game because the game is an
so
equilibrium
this is the whole reason
of
why
mechanics.
I keep thinking we should address multiple things just because it's all like so connected, right?
Yeah, but
Like the
you have to fully explain something first, though. You know,
yeah,
because this is we're recording right now,
yeah.
and theoretically, someone is listening right now, and I'm just trying to make sure that we don't rush through this and miss all the little details of us trying to sum up the last like you said 3 to 4 months. It's been more like 7 or 8. It's been a while that we have been contemplating this specific collection of ideas about
Yeah.
Warframe,
Like in
right?
my mind when like because the way I see it is when I play Warframe and I encounter a much higher level enemy, I usually don't notice. Like if math is on my side, I just breeze through it and I'm just nonplussed about it. Like nothing like nothing's changed. Like doesn't matter if it's a nullifier, doesn't matter if it's a heavy gunner, doesn't matter if it's a Nox, doesn't even matter right now, with the amalgams. Like usually anything I encounter, I just breeze through it very quickly, and it's not particularly interesting. Like honestly, my favorite enemy so far in Warframe is the what's the name of that giant, not the boss, the giant spider in Fortuna that starts
Oh,
off with like the purple shield,
oh, the kite arachnoid.
Kite Arachnoid. I really enjoy fighting
Yes,
that thing. I
really good
find it
enemy.
I find it slightly annoying just because of like all the shields. But my favorite part is when as I am fighting it, it just decides to just teleport somewhere else and go like, nah, I'm not gonna deal with this.
Well, it doesn't
Teleports
teleport.
over.
It stealths and then teleports because then it kind of like
Mm,
bleeds back into reality.
yeah. It does like a phase
And
shift,
on top of
almost.
that, it has like half a dozen different actions,
Yeah,
which makes it like a particularly complex enemy.
yeah,
Even if you still address it the same way, it's at least forcing you to move in different ways. Like when it throws out the EMP net, it's like, okay, I can't stand here anymore for like a duration of
yeah,
time, right? When it does the lasers, it's like either you get behind cover, but most of the time you just kind of
yeah.
duck and get to a place where you know the lasers aren't sweeping. And sometimes if you're like driving the threat level up, because I've done a lot with like messing with the threat level in Orb Valis. It's one of my favorite parts of Orb Valis personally. Sometimes you have to conserve ammo because there isn't more ammo nearby. So eventually you have to change your tactic and go in on melee on its legs. Because if you don't, even though I think it takes less melee damage, I can't quite confirm it, but I feel that way. I think it
Mhm.
takes less melee damage than range damage. But the point is you at least are aware of a kite arachnoid's existence because it drops
Yeah,
in like an orbital drop and then
yeah.
starts doing things that
It's
affects the gameplay.
like, oh, yes. So this is similar to my thoughts on like with like Vermintide, right? Or like something, or yeah, like in Vermintide. So in Vermintide, when a special
Warning,
shows up,
real
you
quick
you get
before you continue. We're
yes.
going to start talking about making unique enemies more unique, not by adding math and damage numbers to them, but by adding things for them to do essentially,
Well, simply
as
just
well as
adding gameplay elements that, how should I say it, incentivize like interesting play, right? And then also become like, because like one of the issues with Warframes right now is usually when you're fighting, high level enemies, you usually don't notice, right? Like it's either you breeze through it
you
or
don't
you're
notice
just
until you
hitting a
start
bullet
taking a lot
sponge.
of damage when you're fighting level 80s. Like to give an example of just today. And speaking of today, before we get too much deeper into this,
Mhm.
for context, we are recording this the night before TennoCon 2019
Okay.
because we don't want to be colored by anything that we hear at TennoCon 2019. We want to get these thoughts out into a recorded
Yeah.
format before we learn anything
Yeah.
new, right? So to give an example from just today on July 5th, I was playing the new Wukong rework in a survival mission that starts at level
Mhm.
21 to 26. It's Titan on Saturn. I remember specifically because I was
Mhm.
doing this earlier, so I could bring it up now. I did not notice that the enemies were higher level until they were past level 60. And I only noticed because my Helminth Charger Garm went down. That's the only reason I noticed. It didn't matter how many napalms, heavy gunners, bombards.
Yeah.
I noticed the Noxes at 8 minutes in, starting at 8 minutes in, but otherwise, because Noxes are
Well, they
pretty
have.
reasonable enemy, right? Otherwise, I didn't. Nothing changed except for in the survival mission specifically, how frequently I had to hit
Okay.
the life support. That's the only thing that changed in that mission is how frequently I hit the life support. I kept running around the mission just looking for
Yeah.
enemies because
But other than that, you're
the
like,
spawns were spotty, right? But otherwise, it's like my pet went down, and I was hitting life support like at double the rate I was
oh,
at the start of the mission. Like that's all that changed. Nothing about the addition of napalms and bombards and heavy gunners
yeah.
added anything to what was happening. The Noxes add at least a little bit because once or twice I was like, all right, I should probably swap off of my melee weapon
Mhm.
to my
But
Gorgon
other than that, you were just
to
fine.
shoot him in the face because it's easier sometimes.
Yeah.
Other than that, everything was fine, right? Nothing changed, and we perceive that as a problem related to the fact that
Interesting.
Warframe's difficulty scales with math and
Well,
levels, and not
well,
with the
like
enemies
it's
getting tougher
like
over any
we
amount
have
of
an
time.
issue with particularly the armor scaling because it doesn't add any interesting gameplay elements, right?
Well,
Like if
armor
it
can
were to have
exist, but
no, of course, armor can exist, but if it had an interesting gameplay element,
the armor is
like
a
the
crutch
kind of
for the difficulty.
yeah, and like I said, the a lot of these design choices were probably or have probably kept going on because of how Warframe came to be, right?
Yeah,
And so in my mind, when we address, okay, what are some things that we would like to see solved in Warframe in the future going on? Tonight, the night before TennoCon 2019 on July 5th. Armor scaling needs to not necessarily be removed, but change so that in conjunction with changing armor scaling to not just be
have
like,
a
oh,
theoretical
this thing,
cap.
yes, have a
Where
theoretical
like
cap, but
the
also
enemies scale up a ton, but eventually it doesn't matter if the enemies gain more armor, the damage reduction caps out. And this is not
yeah,
a new idea. This was an idea from like 3 years ago that there a certain portion of the community was talking about, right?
yeah. And then we
So this
also
isn't this isn't new.
yeah, and then besides that, it's about having the interesting gameplay element. So like again, we like the kite arachnoid because when it appears, it's noticeable, right? You have a decent sound cue as it descends from the sky, burrows into the earth, and just spreads out its legs and goes, "Hey, I'm about to
And it's
hurt
an
you,
enemy
buddy."
that does something different than all the other enemies in the sense that it's focused on zoning. Because most
Yes,
of its attacks, the primary ones being the spinning lasers and the kind of electric field it throws down, both of those do a heavy amount of zoning that most other enemies don't do,
yeah,
which
yeah,
changes the nature of the gameplay.
yeah, and like I would assume if it were affected by CC, let's say. Like, is it affected by a lot of CC, or is it
I
or does
don't
it just
know,
nullify things?
because usually if you're using crowd control on it, and not killing it, you're probably dead because it's
Okay,
actually threatening. You know what I
because
mean?
yeah, because I
I just don't know.
okay,
I don't know.
because I know I've used things like I've used Nova, and I think I've used Frost, and it doesn't seem like it cares. It just seems to just go like, yeah,
Which is
no,
okay.
yes,
It
but
has
so
there's a specific way in which you deal with it, and you don't just like lay into it, right?
yeah,
Because of the way that the shield recharging mechanics work. Like you lay into it until it starts recharging purple shields, right? And
yeah,
then you stop because it's going to keep charging purple shields until fully charged, anyways. And then you continue.
like what it makes me think about is with an enemy like that. So you know how we've had a shift in Warframe. It used to be that we had a big CC meta. That's why Vaughn was loved for so long.
Back in
That's
his
why
early days.
but back in the olden
Back
days,
in the old days.
that's why like Frost was just like amazing. That's why Nyx being in a team was just like, bro, we got a Nyx, we got this.
Just enemies start fighting each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, and then it's switched over to like the super damaging meta because of how the kite arachnoid works. If more enemies started doing things similar to that and CC then became effective, we would probably see a shift in the gameplay choices
Well,
of the player
it isn't
base.
specifically about CC becoming effective because there is certainly some people who feel like the best way to deal with things in Warframe is for enemies to be dead. Therefore, damage is king, right?
Yeah.
And this can still apply with certain
Mhm.
Warframes to the kite arachnoid. There's certain like Mesa. Mesa can still it takes a lot more
Mhm.
bullets, right? But Mesa can still use peacemakers and 100 to 0% health a kite
Okay.
arachnoid. It's still
Yeah.
possible, but at the very least, Mesa has to sit tight, or if you're using Mesa's Waltz, slow down for a significant portion of time. And it's not like the kite arachnoids alone most of the time. Usually, there's at least a couple other enemies. Maybe you've
Yeah.
cleared out the area, and that's when you realize there was a kite arachnoid. Like all of this
Mhm.
is kind of random, right? But like it's okay for frames to be focused on the
Mhm.
best enemy is a dead enemy, right? It's just like with kind of the undertones of people saying the best enemy is a dead
Mhm.
enemy. Why do we need crowd control? Right, the players who say that. It, we don't think it comes from the fact that, or at least I don't think it comes from the fact that uh, that more of the Warframe design has been focused on giving all of the frames some amount of damage. I think it has to do with the fact that armor scaling was never
Yeah. Well,
addressed. They just gave us more ways to build into it. Like example, like just a primary example, hunter
mhm.
munitions on crit weapons, on crit primary specifically, right? Like that's a different way to deal with armor other than just corrosive, because there's this general idea that like if you just put corrosive on everything and you never
Yeah.
need to switch it and you'll always be fine because whenever you run into armor, everything's
Like
okay.
when I think of Warframe and let's say the armor scaling and like the changes that I would like to see, addressing like my thought process of like, hey, look, I like the kite arachnoid. I would like it to do things similar to, for example, a game like Vermintide. In Vermintide, besides having your fodder enemies, right, you also have your specials. And besides the specials, there are also enemies that are just considered higher rank, which
Like you'll
aren't
just see rats with like a glaive
yeah,
and
you'll
like
see like a storm
helmet,
vermin.
and they're a little more armored. And sometimes you see an enemy who just has a shield. You know, and like
Yeah,
that's all well and good. You could equate that to like kind of like the lancers and the Grineer, and then like the Grineer that carry shotguns,
but like,
and then like uh,
but
you know, just those basic enemies. But there's like variation with them,
yeah,
like
like
little
so
bits.
like when I'm going through a run in Vermintide 2 specifically, because it's the upgraded version, and I encounter a storm vermin. Storm vermin usually just has a single halberd. It's a much bigger enemy, much bigger rat, but
Lots
it's
of
not a
armor.
special enemy. It's just a stronger, tankier enemy. Every once in a while, you will also encounter a storm vermin that has a shield. And now, besides being careful of the good amount of damage that that thing can do to me, I also have to be like aware of the fact that it will block a lot of my damage depending on how I hit it and where I hit it. So, for example, if I had a light weapon like the rapier on the witch hunter, and I proceeded to just like start poking away at him, he's kind of like he's gonna laugh at me for a while just because I'm not gonna be able to do a lot of interesting things to him. So like that's something that could be in my mind added to Warframe in a different way.
Yeah, and
Together
and
with
while we're bringing up enemies with shields, I believe we're both well aware that there is a Grineer enemy that has a shield, and there are Grineer enemies that place cover. But at the end of the day, the shield rarely ever mean like the Grineer that carry the shield, right? Rarely ever means anything unless you get so close that he's able to knock you down,
yep,
right? And then when it comes to the cover, most of the time the cover doesn't mean much either
yeah,
because you're already
it's
blitzing through whatever content you're doing. So
yeah,
like when they place the cover, you're already behind it.
it's like, oh,
So
you placed the cover,
it
how
isn't just
cute.
about adding shields to enemies. It's about making the mechanics that you add to certain enemy types, specifically the enemies that we're deeming special enemies, right? Making those mechanics that you add meaningful.
It's about adding gameplay type changes that are actually effective on the board,
Yep.
right? So like in my mind, whenever I think of the Grenier, the best example of how I would like them to behave would be how enemies would behave in, let's say, the Division 2, which is the only one I played out of the two games, or like in Gears of War, where they actually do go into cover, and when they pop out, they're hitting you, and it's noticeable that they're hitting you, and there's like a good deal of sound. Versus right now, where let's say you encounter an enemy who goes into cover, and you go like, "I'm gonna pop an ability, and it's all okay." Like if you are a Saren, you just hit forward and watch
Well, I think
everything
that
pop up
part's
and take
okay.
damage, right? So
Like we're specifically talking about
what?
specials, right?
Yeah, no, no, but
Like
in
the
my
fodder
mind,
enemies, like just to clarify real quick, the fodder enemies should do more. Like there are certain Grineer that will use a jetpack and homing missiles that I believe are on Mars. There's a specific type of like basic Grineer enemy
mhm.
that will jetpack up in the air and use homing missiles. All of the Grineer should do that because that forces you to like look up.
Well,
That's at least something, right? Like adds a little bit of extra texture to the enemies that become fodder.
It would be an interesting gameplay change, but you don't necessarily want every single enemy to have auto lock on for everything, right? Because
Yeah, I'm
like
not saying specifically the lock on missiles, but for at least the jetpacks, right? Just as an example,
yeah, like
because
give them a
I'm
way
trying to
to
make sure that both of us don't get too lost. Because remember, we're trying to cover
Mhm.
everything, and just as a bookmark right now, we are already 40 minutes in,
Oof. Okay.
and we're trying to keep this at about 2 hours, and there's a lot more left to go through. So we're just to
Okay.
preface, like quadruple preface, we're trying to say a lot. This is going to be a long listen on your way to the office or something,
um
right?
when I think of positive changes that could be made to Warframe, addressing armor scaling would be great, and then addressing interesting gameplay changes, as in how you address the enemies, would be a boon to the game, right? And a fodder enemy can be a fodder enemy, but you shouldn't just be able to just like blatantly slaughter everything just because it's a fodder enemy. Like it should at least be somewhat effective on the board. Just because you have a pawn on the board does not mean the pawn is
Yeah,
useless. It will have its uses, right?
yeah. Well, it's like give
And
them
then
all
going into the
jetpacks.
special type of enemy. Sure. But like then addressing what a special enemy should be, it should be something that similar to the kite arachnoid, when it hits the board, it's noticeable. You know, you hear that sound cue. You start becoming aware as a player that it is somewhere around you, and you need to look out for it because it might
Or if you
wreck
don't hear it,
your
you'll start
run,
seeing
your mission.
lasers.
Yeah, right. Like a new example of that would be the amalgam enemies that they have that sort of like siren to them when they are around.
Do they have a
So you
siren?
know that when you're doing the
Those are
mission, what's it
demos.
called?
That's
The
specific.
Demolist. That okay, that's it.
That's
Okay.
not even the
S-
amalgams. That's like a specific
So,
subset
so,
of
so,
the amalgams for that specific mission type.
so in my mind, then the cooler amalgam, because I actually really I enjoy those specifically because you know they're coming towards you. It's somewhat annoying, somewhat like alerting to you, like that sound that's like that's like that echoey sound of like, hey, I'm coming towards you. I'm gonna wreck your mission. Check this out. And then they show up, and depending on what it is, it might be a bit hard to defeat it versus everything else, which you know usually ignore. So, like in my mind, I would like to see Grenier evolve into being more menacing. It's a rated M game. Like Warframe is not a T for teen, not an E for everyone. It's a rated M game, so it can become harder. It can become harsher. It can
Well,
become
the
a bit
harder
more
is
brutal,
completely
and
separate
that would
from a
be okay in
rating,
my mind.
just to make that
Well,
clear. But the aesthetic can become grittier.
yes, yes. Like in my mind, Grenier are or should be like the grubs in let's say a Gears of War, or like the enemies in the division. But I like the Gears of War example specifically because Gears of War throws at you certain like different type of special enemies that when they show up, you are aware that you need to get rid of them or else, right? Like you'll have these hulking dudes with like a giant, like a huge shotgun, and if you let them get near you, they're gonna blast you to the past, bro. Like you gotta address them. And then going next to that, in my mind, like the infested are thematically similar to like the flood or the xenomorphs, and I think it's not xenomorphs, the oh my god, the enemies in Dead Space, the necromorphs. So like they should be scarier, and you feel that with the music, right? Like they're sort of going for that, but there's not enough of a like a scary feeling when fighting them, enough of like a creepy feeling, right? and
Yeah.
and 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 that's something that, let's say, a Halo or a Dead Space addresses in a much more interesting way, where like they look a bit similar to something you might recognize, but they also look very much mutated, right? They look very, very, very creepy, and they wreck your day with how they attack you. And so I would like them to transition into, let's say, when you're doing an infested map, the map is dark, like there's no lights. You know, the infestation has crawled throughout the level and taken over, and things don't look at all how they should look. So like if it's a
You're already
let's say
halfway there when it comes to
but
infested on tile sets that aren't infested base.
yeah, but they could do way more, right?
Yeah,
Like let's say in and this is a better the like the greatest example, the opus what is it, the opus
magnum
magnus,
opus.
magnum opus
Opus
example.
Magnus is like it's a game on Steam. Continue.
The magnum opus example would be the enemies from Warhammer 40k, like the chaos enemies, specifically Nurgle. He's the god of like corruption. And when you encounter a force that praises that god, or is aligned with that god, and you go on into a ship, the ship is putrid. Like it doesn't look like any human would live there, right? You like the ship starts looking more like a living being rather than an actual ship, even though there are enemies within it that used to be, let's say, humans. So that's what I would like to see with the infested. So that if you go to fight for it, for example, it doesn't look like a human level at all. Like everything's changed. Everything is trying to kill you. Like whether that's the environment or the infested. And I would also appreciate a bit more aggressiveness with the infested, just because a lot of times, like besides most enemies being unnoticeable, I think the infested are in the worst spot of all, just because most of them have to melee you in some way. Like a few of them have projectiles, but that's very few. Everything else is just kind of just like, you know, blaze through. And if you have an Ignis, just like sweep on by. If you have a Nova, you hit your four, you hit something once, and everything just like blows up as it goes. Versus becoming something that's like interesting and fearful, and you have to be careful. Because that's one thing I appreciate the crap out of in let's say like a Dead Space, a Vermintide, or a Dark Souls. Every once in a while you'll hit a dark corner, and even if you're with a team, everyone slows down because you're addressing at that moment that something bad might be around the corner, right? That's why like sound can be so effective in a game, where if you are in this moment where it is quiet, you don't hear anything, and it is dark, you go, hold on, maybe something's waiting for me around the corner, maybe it's waiting above me, you know, and everyone starts like twitching a bit, and I enjoy those moments. And with the corpus, I honestly, I have nothing. Like the corpus are the like the tech faction, but I don't know what they could do with them to make them, you know, more interesting. And they've made curious choices with enemies like the moas or the kite arachnoids. So I honestly think they should go more into that, like sort of like these cybernetic animals type things that they do. I find interesting.
Anyways, I just kind of let you speak your complete thought. There's plenty of nuance that I feel like you could have tweaked in there, but you got the point across, which is what's important. I'm because we're saying the corpus is kind of the factions in the best state right now. Does that
Mhm.
mean there isn't room for improvement?
Addressing the corpus enemies. Do you have any expansions that you want to do to like that unit?
So
Like
corpus
basically,
enemies that I think are fine right now. Nullifiers, because when you make everything else around them have more mechanics, nullifiers will have enough for you to worry about, right? Because they
mhm,
nullify Warframe abilities. Kite
mhm,
arachnoids, I've already said. I think specifically the jackal units that appear on Fortuna in Orb Vallis, I think those have a reasonable amount of depth to them because sometimes they have machine guns, sometimes they have the machine gun and the shield that completely blocks damage, so you have to
mhm,
get an angle on them. I think those are fine. But every enemy that isn't just a variation of the bread and butter across the board. Like, I think Corpus is on top just because of the quality of the enemies, not like the design, but literally the aesthetic quality of the enemies and how the MOAs have always kind of been weird. And then those 3 enemies, roughly, every enemy that isn't just the bread and butter enemy across the board needs to have some kind of
Okay.
mechanic added to them that meaningfully affects the gameplay. I was referring to this in our bullet points as environmental interaction because the enemies are in fact a part of the environment. Like usually environmental interaction refers to, for example, the gas barrels that you added to Jupiter that could blow up and then create gas
Mhm.
clouds, which are really bad for everyone's health, particularly Warframes, right? But like the enemies are at the end of the day part of the environment, and there's no other than Nox's ancients to some degree, and the other any corpus enemies I've listed. There's essentially no enemy interaction. All of the gameplay is
Okay.
focused on the Warframe because you just blitz through everything. As a player who's figured out how to play the game, right? We're not talking about Dave who has played 10 hours of Warframe and has crafted the first
Yeah,
batch of
like
weapons, right?
the new player is still trying to even understand like how damage works, because that's primarily, I would imagine, what a new player has to like come to understand, right? Like, oh, how do these?
I'm sure
Oh,
some
have a
people miss it
weapon.
altogether.
Yeah, like I would imagine that it's like the what is it, the stats for how many people have actually killed, you know, a single eidolon. It's, what is it, like 5-6% of the community? It's like some super small amount.
I heard from
Meanwhile, it's
somewhere that it was 2.3% of all registered accounts have killed an Eidolon. And
oof.
like even though it's all registered accounts and that can attribute it can be attributed to like a lot of like other alternate accounts, people who have those or people who quit the game or whatever, that's still a really small number. It's at least to me.
Yeah.
Like this is going a little bit away from the difficulty thing, but
Well, again,
a little bit.
armor scaling can go to get like, if you were to make Warframe like this is why I like addressing it as like, if you were going to do a Warframe 2, right? If they did like that weird suggestion that I had of like, oh, Warframe going into, let's say, Unreal Engine, just because they have
A
the
different
power
upgraded
of,
engine and then restarting from scratch with all the things they learned.
yeah, like
Which I'm stating for the record, I doubt you guys would do that, but I'm not gonna hold it against you if you do, right? I really,
like
personally,
it
it's kind of like it's a whatever kind of
yeah,
thing.
it's like, it's an interesting choice, because while you could transfer, let's say, the assets, the coding for how some things behave just wouldn't be there, and that's extra work that would have to be put in, and that would take a lot of time and a lot of effort. But then again, if they're starting from scratch with, you know, uh, uh, uh Warframe New Light, like the example of Destiny, like Destiny New Light, they could go ahead and, let's say, they switch over to Unreal Engine, because it allows them to have one with a new contract with every single console manufacturers. It allows them to do crossplay without any issue, and they go, okay, we're going to start Warframe, and we're going to fix armor scaling. We're going to make special enemies actually special, make them similar to like the Kite Arachnoids, where when it shows up, you get a sound cue and you are aware it's there and you are looking for it because it is an imminent threat to your party. Okay, cool. You've done that. You've made it so that there's a cap to armor scaling. You've added unique enemies. Then what else do you address? Well, regular mobs. Regular mobs actually have to be a threat. They can't just be something that you breeze over, within milliseconds, just because it's supposed to be a regular mob, because it doesn't make it entertaining. And then besides that, what else do you do? Well, it's space ninjas. The ninja part is still not there, because not most of them, actually, most Warframes don't have the ninja aspects. And then you have things like the movement. That's something that Steve has actually tweeted about, that he wants to address. So we have armor scaling, we have the unique mobs similar to let's say a Vermintide or a Gears of War, for like, specifically this example is the Grenier, or like the infested behaving similar to the necromorphs. How about
We're
horizontal
just
and
you're
vertical
just
progression?
jumping over to
What are your
that.
thoughts on that? Yep, go.
That's terrible. Oh God, Dude, you're not.
Go. Go. Have thoughts. Go.
Horizontal versus vertical progression. Okay, Warframe has this weird blend of things where the vertical progression doesn't exist in the traditional sense of like you gain levels, therefore you gain power. You gain levels in Warframe, which like are ranks, right?
Mhm,
On like everything ranks up to 30 for the potential of power because it's based on your build and like what mods you put on a
mhm.
thing, right? So there's still at the end of the day, just to like point out that distinction, this is like a vertical progression system,
Yes.
right?
Over time, you
I
accrue
personally
mods, weapons, and of course your arsenal increases, your amount of warframes increases, and of course your knowledge base increases.
I personally have a kinship for the horizontal progression systems of roguelikes because a lot of roguelikes like unless the either like the math of something or the idea of something is flawed for the setup of the game, everything is useful across the board. And I'm going to, without getting too deep in here, because we're already like an hour in at this point, I think. Um, I'm going to talk about Warframe's hierarchy and why it's okay that not everything is balanced. I'm not asking, like, we're essentially not asking for the Cronus to be as powerful as, let's say,
Mhm,
a Zaw, right? But Warframe's weapon hierarchy, because there's so many weapons, and because of the change, this is 2019, so last year, you guys spent spring uh, fixing a
mhm,
lot of stuff and buffing a lot of weapons, which is cool. That's a good direction to go in to like address a lot of the old content. You also added Kuva Survival, which I think is a really
mhm,
good alternative option to just running a bunch of Kuva floods, right? Uh, but simultaneously, it showed me at the time that it is possible to get to a point where the hierarchy is compressed enough that every unique weapon, and when I say unique weapon, um, so there's the Tigris, the Sancti Tigris, and the Tigris Prime. I'm not talking about each one of those individually. I'm just talking about the Tigris family in general. That's a unique weapon. Every unique weapon can theoretically do the content. Like that's not possible because of this. That's not quite possible now because with the rework to weapon balance and basically buffing everything, at the same time you leaned into giving master rank meaning where at least in my opinion it didn't necessarily need to mean as much like gameplay wise, right? Because at around the same time it start master rank became tied to how much rep you could grind per day with syndicates or with the open world factions. And the general master rank to be able to use a thing,
mhm.
like to use all the things in Warframe, went up from 12 to 15, and then a lot of weapons got pushed up the system, right? And if you were to uh, address like armor scaling and then making sure that all the special enemies are very special,
Mhm.
right? Kind of the way that enemies in Vermintide are special because that's kind of the baseline that we've been using, right? It would then be nice if also the weapons that at least the weapons that have been forgotten about, like I know most players probably don't care about the Prisma Tetra. I think the Prisma Tetra is like the prime example because out of the Tetra series, which is the Tetra and the Prisma Tetra, don't think almost anyone uses the Prisma Tetra, and I know you all have the analytics for this because you also balance ribbons based on popularity and stats, right? Or at least that's what we know from what you publicly told us, right? So it would be nice if the weapons, the weapon hierarchy, and even when it comes, like you all have been working at it for years now with all the weapon reworks, not the weapon reworks, the Warframe reworks.
Okay.
Because it's not about there being a progression path necessarily, right? Like I understand that mastery rank has kind of become the progression path, and
Mhm.
it's fine that the Mark One Bratton is the Mark One Bratton. There's literally the normal version of the Bratton, and then there's the Bratton Prime, and those two versions are better than the Mark One Bratton. That's fine.
Mhm.
There's already upgrade paths in Warframe. It's about compressing the hierarchy of weapons in Warframes so that the bottom line of like the best version of every weapon is like it can do the
So
content,
so usability,
right?
like basically,
Yeah.
if
Like
you're
like
gonna
to
have an
make this
arsenal of
abundantly clear, to make this
Mhm.
abundantly clear, I'm not asking for the Prisma Tetra to be on the same level that the community or the stats deem the Prisma Gurkata. I just want the Prisma Tetra to without a ribbon because ribbons are kind of an extra thing that you do once you get towards the end of the game, right? It's kind of this endless progression that people can engage in
Mhm.
like optionally, right? The Prisma Tetra needs to be at a level, and I am also aware that the Prisma Tetra has been buffed, and I'm not sure aware of the effects of that because I don't currently own a Prisma Tetra. I want to be completely clear with that too while I'm using the Prisma Tetra as an example. But I know like the point is that the weapon hierarchy, the bottom of the weapon hierarchy should be it can do the content and not just level 15 content. Like that the bottom line should be the best version's able to do the content because there's so many weapons in Warframe at this point that having multiple versions of weapons and all of that, like there's a lot. And this also goes back to kind of the learning curve for new players being so steep in Warframe. If if a player knew the best version of a weapon would function okay, like you'd be able to do all the content with it, and they wouldn't have this fear of it being like the acrid, where like it kind of unless you buff it up with a ribbon, right? It
Like
you should just use a Hystrix instead. Like these general feelings that are created by the weapon balance being in the state that it is, and like buffing weapons that are underused is a good thing, and like if you want to do more of that, go ahead. But I am of the understanding that bringing everything
well,
to a
what
level
would I
playing field is not the greatest idea
like?
from
What
a
I would
game design
imagine,
perspective. So that's why I'm referring to it as a hierarchy. Because at the end of the day, like the Prisma Gurkata
like
is
in my
going to be
mind,
higher on the
what I would
hierarchy than other
imagine
machine guns.
would be that like the path that I find interesting that they could take would be so like in again, Vermintide. In Vermintide, you can be on legendary difficulty with all white items, meaning starting items. And as long as you've got your person to level 25, level 30, or whatever, and you've picked out your perks to something that's workable, and you play smart, you can do the content, even if it's at the highest difficulty, right? And sad example to that would be in Dark Souls. In Dark Souls, you have a good deal of weaponry choices, whether that is knives, blunt weapons that like one-handed blunt weapons, two-handed blunt weapons, swords, long swords, falchions, your bows, your crossbows. All the content is doable. You just have to spec out to something that works with that weapon, with that gear. So in my mind, the comparison to, let's say, a roguelike is everything is usable. Everything has, you know, it's play style that would work with it, and you can do all of the content. So there's no wasted effort because if you develop weapons that most of the player base does not use,
That's
that's
the
time
equivalent.
and money wasted.
It's the equivalent of wasted development time because
Yeah, and
people will use it like we would rather that people cherish the weapons that they have rather than be like to use a term that the community uses a lot. This is mastery fodder. You just level it up and then
yeah,
trash it,
yeah.
right? Which is okay if like I said, the Mark One Bratton is a fine example. I know a person who has put either 100 or over 100. I mean, it depends. 100, like just for the sake of being a joke, has put 100 form
Mhm.
on a Mark One Bratton, and like it can actually pump out damage at that point. But Forma shouldn't be the end all be all of like something's ability to do something.
Like
Which go ahead.
something shouldn't be effective just because you've had to add forma to it. It should already be effective on its own,
Maybe
and the
not like
forma should
peak
just be like an added
effectiveness.
bonus.
Maybe not like
It's
peak effectiveness.
it's like the the build you came up with for Oberon. The build you came up with for Oberon works without, oh sorry, Oberon Prime works
Yeah.
without adding what? Like, does it even have forma on it?
I'm just gonna use this to lead into kind of some of my own personal feelings about Warframe and how I think it relates to, because at the end of the day, we're talking so much about difficulty and then touching on progression here for a little bit because a lot of people have like a lot of different problems with Warframe,
Mhm.
right? And I think at the end of the day, it can be rooted back to the gameplay because as much as the gameplay is amazing in its current state, we just spent an hour finding ways, and I would hope pointing out ways that it could be
Like, it's
better
basically you want to improve
or
the
like
gameplay loop,
ideas about how it
right?
could be
You
better.
want to improve the gameplay loop
Yes.
of, like, you don't want to just have 4 people squad up, go into a mission, beat the mission within 3 minutes and be like, "Yep, we got the thing. That's it." Versus like, we went into a mission, we encountered hardship and we failed, but it was still kind of cool because we all tried our hardest, and that's okay. Because that's the general feeling that I always have with, say, a Vermintide or a Dark Souls or even like a Monster Hunter. I may go into like doing something like going into a level, fighting, going after a monster, doing a specific quest, like with all hopes of succeeding. But if I fail, I'm like, okay, that was a bummer. Let's do it again. Versus just like, okay, we did the thing. That's it. Right? Like you want to create moments where you like have like these memories of, it's like when you do your first like big boss fight in let's say like a Dark Souls or a Monster Hunter. Like you do the big boss fight, and if you have your crew with you and you had hardships, even if you failed a couple of times, you'll remember them just because like it was dope. Like that's what you want to do. You want to have that shared moment of like, yo, that was freaking dope. Let's do that shit again.
Just to make something clear again, because it's important to keep re-providing context, right?
Uh-huh.
All of Warframe doesn't need to turn into what people deem as Dark Souls level difficulty.
Hell no. That would
It
be,
it would be nice if it's possible. Is like why
well,
we're talking so much about difficulty, right?
yeah, that's why I imagine, the devs are, or specifically Steve, he mentioned this with the interview with Mogamu about considering doing like a, like a little star system of like, hey, look, this has 1 star, stars, 3 stars, 4 stars, or whatever, similar to what they've done with Fortuna for the difficulty selection, right? So that like they
But
are,
maybe a more extreme version of it still.
yeah, yeah, like you want all the content that's within the game to have value, right? To have its weight to it, be respected. You want a balanced armor system that, makes it difficult, but not just annoying bullet spongy slog, right? It's like why it's so nice when if you're playing let's say a melee game and you strike something with a sword, there's a certain reaction that enemy gives to being hit, and you're like, okay, I'm at least doing something. Versus just like I'm shooting, and this thing does not care. It's still winding up its freaking Gatling gun and proceeding to destroy me, right? Um, like these this is the whole reason for which I say like everything is connected. The armor scaling, the interesting specials, the more challenging mobs, the weapons actually having worth and value and weight and being appreciated, and then the whole difficulty of missions being something that everyone can choose so that they can learn and grow as they play the game. Because not everyone is going to want to do a legendary run in Vermintide, and that's okay.
Yeah.
They can just want to do,
Like the new
one
player
tier.
difficulty is perfectly fine the way it is right now.
Yeah, because you want the new
Because they're
player.
just trying to learn how to bullet jump.
Yeah, you
Like,
want them to learn the
like
mechanics, right?
you know, I want to tie. You've already started on it. I want to tie together with my own like personal account
Okay.
of like kind of like how I play Warframe and why I think I play Warframe the way I do, and how I wish I played Warframe differently based on the game asking
Mhm.
me to. Right. So I'm just gonna roll into this. Yeah, you were taught. You mentioned earlier about how my Oberon build had like is for like no forma on Oberon, and like it gets the
Mhm.
job done. Right. To make this clear, as a player to DE, I have formed my frames all across all frames. I have put six
Jesus.
forma on
Wait.
them, and you may
So
you
like
on across all of them. I own I own like 30, right? I have put six forma on them. I've put two on Vauban. I've put one on Ember, two on
huh.
Gara, and one on Wukong. And this format has nothing to do with them being my favorites, except for Vauban, because I do like Vauban a lot. He is my homeboy
Yeah.
back from back in the day, right? But it none of that, other than like Vauban, is because I felt like the game was asking me to progress through it. All of this, like avoiding forma, and if I look at my weapons might be similarly shocking. Some of them have three forma, like a couple of them have three forma on them. My phage is one of my favorite weapons. It has five forma on it. But Warframe in its current state, once you understand it, does not ask you to engage with the grind, so to speak. And the grind is, I'm at least feel, is a terrible term for developers. So let me rephrase it differently, so that you know that I'm rephrasing grind as something else. The progression of Warframe is not justified in its current state, I don't think. Once you understand how Warframe works, like I have a really good understanding
Mhm.
personally as a player of how the damage types work and how status works and how modding works, right? And I realized after I understood this fully that I don't need
Mhm.
to. There's a certainly
Mhm.
I would say a significant portion of the community that min maxes, right? And we know what min max means. You know, I I don't min max, and I feel like I wish there was a because I wish there was a reason to, because the game,
Yeah.
like we said towards the beginning, the difficulty scales mathematically, not mechanically. Enemies get tankier and deal more damage, and damage is like an okay form of difficulty, but
Mhm.
none of it is affecting your play style except for kitas and nullifiers, right? So across all of my content, I've stopped short. I'm, as a player, master rank 20, and I've been playing Warframe since 2013. And you and I both know a guy who got
Which is
to about that
insane.
same mastery rank in 2 months and then quit the game. And then he said that there wasn't enough content in Warframe, which is insane considering how many hours you could spend playing Warframe. And the reason why we bring up the difficulty in all this is it isn't just because like we want a more fulfilling play experience. Because if these changes were made, we feel that all
Yeah,
of
it
this
would have more of a
grind
value, right?
or progression that I am skipping personally because of my
Yeah, like you'd
playstyle
have an
would
incentive
then
to
be
actually
justified
do all these things.
be- because the game would be challenging me at some like
Mhm.
as much as Forma could get insanely repetitive, putting Forma on weapons and warframes, and that being a part of the reason why I don't
Yeah.
do it. I would be more inclined to do it if there was some form of content that justified it. And I know you're working on adding raids back into the game, and I know like Railjack might or Empyrean as it's officially called, right? Might spur a bunch of other things to happen, especially if Empyrean
Qu-
reworks the way that Arcwings work, then
Quick
maybe
side
people
note:
will be more
can
engaged with Arcwing
can
because
it just
across the
be
board,
like?
the majority of people really don't
Can we
care for
just
Arcwing,
praise the
right?
crap
As
out
far
of
as we've
D for
gathered
like
over the years.
such a good game? Like Warframe is a game that has a huge amount of Warframe, so like player characters that you can choose, which I would
Have we made
imagine
it to 40 or are we about to get to 40? I forget at this point.
either way, it's
I
still
think we're
freaking a
at 40.
lot.
Yeah.
Like each one of those characters, I imagine, each one of those Warframes, I imagine, takes months to develop, right? And test and get to like a level that is satisfying. Also, shout out to Pablo for freaking fixing some Warframes because that dude's done a
Yeah, just gotta
good
do a
job.
Pablo shout out.
Freaking hell yeah.
Scott as well. I'm sure he's fixed something that we just don't know about. It's just like usually we're aware when Pablo fixes something, right? Because
Yeah.
Pablo like kind of makes it known, or somebody else will say, "Oh, Pablo worked on this."
I'm
Because there's a certain section of community that just kind of is like, "Praise be Pablo," right?
well,
You know.
it's like so like Rebecca is like I'm gonna give like the line of shout outs.
Sure.
Rebecca's
All
the
right. Here, shout outs.
best.
Go.
Okay. Rebecca Ford is the best community manager I've ever seen. And whenever I look at a game that's trying to do something similar, I always go like, "Hey guys, take a step back from whatever, you know, ego you might have and look at what these guys are doing and try to emulate it. Have communication with your player base. Do a live stream twice a month or once a month, and maintain that chain of communication and don't disrespect people and establish trust. Like DE is loved, Warframe is loved because of that trust that's been established. And that, while the developers aren't going to do everything that community wants because
It's their game.
again, opinions are like butts. Like everyone has one. Like it's not gonna like lead you anywhere if you follow the opinion of every single person around you. If you're never like sure of yourself, you can take some suggestions, but you shouldn't implement everything, right? So like Reb has done a freaking great job. Steve is like I appreciate Steve just for like the meme of it all because he's like memey, but also just like a giant nerd, and I appreciate the crap out of him. He's like the Steve is to Warframe like what a meme lord plus Hideo Kojima is to Konami or was to Konami, right? Like that dude is just like cool. And then like Scott, while the dude is quiet, is like very quiet, and he's just like, "Hey man, don't mention that we're still working on these other things. Like, come on, guys, surprise, don't say anything." He's still like the Papa Bear to the side, right? Like this dude's just off to the side. He's just like he's taking care of the kids, and the kids don't even know that they're being taken care of, but he's handling things. And
He
then like,
takes hate from people for nerfs because he's one of the guys who's most directly involved with like game balance, right? But at
mhm,
the end of the day, we're both aware that that's a very tough job, and as much as we may complain sometimes, like personally, about like certain fixes or changes or whatever, it's never it's never broken my experience.
yeah, like
So
it's yeah,
shout out to Scott and all the other people who work on that because there's a bunch of people that we're not going to be able to name either because we don't know their names or because we forget their names. But
well,
you know,
yeah,
shout
like
out to
that's
everyone.
one of the good things about the live stream, or one of the great things about the live stream, is that we have a face to attach to, this thing that we love.
It's
But then
human.
yeah, it's human, right? But then the detriment is we don't see the hundreds of people working in the background just like doing stuff, like putting in work. Like being creative is super tough, and it's super important, and
In
it's
this
like it's
way specifically, because it takes so many people to make something like this.
yeah, just because it's such an endeavor. Like it's like one of the why do people appreciate someone like, let's say, Keanu Reeves? Because that dude looks at himself and reflects on himself as a person and goes, "Hey, yeah, I did a good job in this movie, but I had this huge stunt double team, and I know that they're not getting paid enough. You know what? Let's split my check and give it to them also." Right? Like it's just that level of appreciation for a human being, right? Like we need to appreciate each other like enough to understand like, hey, look, that work that you put in, it might, you might not be the face of this thing, but we appreciate the crap out of it because we know and we understand that that was creative juice that you had to pour in, right? Like that's time that you had to put in, right? That's like sleepless nights, maybe, which you hope it's not happening, but this game being the game industry, is a possibility, right? So like the team that works on art, on sound, on getting live streams going, getting TennoCon to actually happen, working on balancing or making levels, making warframes. Like, I kind of wish that they would all step on the stage on TennoCon so people could be like, yo, these are their names. This is
Yeah,
what they do. Respect the crap out of them because they did, a job that is that you might not notice, but you feel as you play the game, right?
yeah.
It's like, why does Pablo get love? Because they've mentioned Pablo, they've showed Pablo a couple of times, but we've seen that effort that he's put in. He could have just been someone that they never mentioned, and we could have just heard, oh, the team is working on this, but like we attach the face to that bit of work that has been done, and people appreciate it because people have a connection to the warframes or certain environments, or it's all about when you play a game for so many years, you build attachment, and so that's why you and I have so much appreciation for what the developers at Digital Extremes have done with Warframe, and why
Yeah.
we're even taking the time and effort to record this whole thing with like like the hopes, right, that like maybe a small modicum of the suggestions that we make
Not
are
even the
are
suggestions, but
listened
that
to.
the ideas are brought to the table, and maybe you find your own way to fix
Yeah,
it.
yeah, it's
That
it's
isn't
almost
like what
like
we're saying. Because at the end of the
yeah,
day, we are trying to see it from a developer's perspective, because the player's perspective is more on the ground and limited, right? Like we've
yeah,
taken a lot of time to kind of step back.
yeah,
Like even though I've specifically used a very personal anecdote of like how I play Warframe, right?
yeah,
Like at the end of the day, that's not, I'm not saying that because I want the game to be this way because I would like it this way. I'm saying it because like we're just doing everything we're doing right now,
uh-huh,
saying everything we're saying because at the end of the day, we appreciate DE and we love Warframe, and we think that our, you know, somewhere
yeah,
our ideas matter, right? And to kind of like, you know, tie it up in a nice, neat little bow,
mhm,
like that's like, you know, now that you're aware that we're not sitting here trying to, and I don't think it sounded like it, if I'm being honest, like we're bashing anything,
yeah,
right?
like all the hubris
We're just trying to help.
of these two guys, just like
Yeah,
crapping
like
on our game. No,
I'm really
it's
down to earth about this. I'm not like it'd be cool if I was actually a game developer, but I'm working on college right now. It's one step at a time,
like
right?
this is the result of us ruminating and
For
brainstorming about
half a
this
year.
for half a
For
year,
half a year.
and like thinking, what could the future of Warframe be? Like what are things that could be done? Like, are we actually gonna get a different Warframe? Are we gonna see Warframe go into a different engine? Like what is going to be done? And
I
like
mean, you're the
Warframe,
guy who's all about the different engine thing, but
yeah, like
yeah.
I no, of course, but like
To make that clear, pin it over there on that side of the table real quick.
I keep thinking about these things just because I do wonder where the game is going to go in the future, right? Like
Yeah.
it's been going on for like 7 years. It's what's that code that phrase from Rev 22 23 million registered losers
Yeah, something
playing this
like that.
game. you know, and it's
I'm
like
raising my hand right now. I'm a loser.
what will be
Just
like
case.
the next step, right? Like Warframe has these space ninjas, these planets, these boss fights that they've tried to make and been improving on as they develop the game. We have Arcwing, we have pets, we
To sum
have
it up, the fuel of DE, as you've shown us, and I think Steve has told us, is ambition. And you
yeah.
always try to one up it yourselves every year. And
Look at
we're just
Empyrean.
bringing up some stuff that's like, yeah, Empyrean, fully expect is going to be wonderful, even if it isn't like, even if it comes out and people are like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Like, regardless of like what the feedback
Mhm.
is on it, the fact that you're trying it is like a testament. Like you're trying to make Empyrean work within the context of Warframe. It's like a testament to like the fuel of ambition, the endless well of ambition that you all have, and that we're bringing up what we brought up in like the last hour, right? Because this is stuff that isn't even necessarily related to that increase in scope that you all have been on for like the last three
Yeah,
years. We just don't want this stuff to get forgotten because we appreciate the
yeah.
work that you do.
It's like, can you imagine being the team working on like Star Citizen or the team working on like Elite Dangerous and hearing like, hey, that huge game that's been going on for freaking years and they've added a bit of the space thing with the Arcwing. Yeah, they're doing this thing that's supposedly similar to the stuff that you've been working on. And they must be like, wait, what?
Ask the
Bro,
question of how
we
they
come on.
feel, like every once in a while, like frequently, like almost on a cadence. I'm just like, how do the people who have made other like Starfighter or like space sim games feel about Warframe? Kind of like just dipping their toe into
Yeah,
it. Like we don't know what the extent of this is going to be. Obviously, you're going to show us that
yeah.
tomorrow, but you
It'll
know,
be interesting. And
the future of Warframe will be interesting, regardless. Anyways,
um
since I feel like that's a good place to stop with the main point, which was the last hour and a half.
okay.
Let's
So,
cover some
so we got
asides.
an hour and a half so far.
An hour and a half so far. Let's cover some asides real quick because I have a
Okay.
couple extra tidbits I want to throw in on the end. I don't know if you have any,
Okay. Go
but
for it.
okay. Couple of asides. First thing, of course, because we are not a part of DE, we don't have all the stats for these things. But I'm going to bring up monetization for a couple minutes. Monetization, to say it clearly. I wasn't saying it clearly just then, I realized.
Words are hard.
Monetization. I just want to bring up for a couple minutes because there's a lot of things going on related to monetization in video games in our world right now.
Mhm.
And I'm sure because you all replaced mod packs with set mod sets, right? In the market, and like that's dope. Good job. Two thumbs up from me,
Mhm.
right? Um, Warframe's monetization, I've always said, is really like to other people who have been playing Warframe. I've always said really fair for a free to play game, considering how much depth Warframe
Yeah.
has.
Like
But there are some things that it's not like that's kind of the end of the ways that you can fix it and make it more player
for
friendly.
example, when I think of monetization, yeah, monetize. Jesus, the same
Yeah,
thing's
this is why
happening
I
again.
repeated myself.
Hard word. Monetization, which they've mentioned like it's a gross word in the DE crew.
Yeah, I
Like
mean it's a gross word
I
to me
always think
too.
about
I feel
well, but it's something that has to be done just because like it's the lifeblood of the
of a
game.
free to play
Like
game specifically.
well, yeah. Um, I I look at Warframe and like my only complaint really about like money expenditure is something as simple as like the accessories, the prime loots accessory thing that they do, which is like $50. Like if that thing was $20, I'd be like, yeah, that's fair. But 50, that's steep.
Yeah, or
And
I'm
and the
not even
reason why I'm always
address that specifically.
ah, but like I
Like,
always
I was gonna talk about something real small and then just kinda leave it.
okay. Like why the reason why I'm always thinking about that specific thing only is because I would imagine a lot more people would be able to just afford the $20
Yeah,
versus the $50, right? Like we live in a broad world where not everyone is doing the same economically, and even if they want to support the game, $50 might be steep, but $20 might be like okay, I can do this for 20
yeah.
bucks, and 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 like still give praise to the fact that you can get prime accessories on their own because that didn't used to be a thing. That was something that was added later on, and I would hope that they continue to iterate on later on in the future. But go ahead. What were your thoughts
So,
on monetization?
I'm like, I started with saying I don't have the numbers of what gains you what amount of money, DE, but I'm sure that Tenogen and the cosmetics gain you tons of money to continue development. I said I wanted to talk about a small thing because what I'm talking about is really small, but it has really wide impact, and it's slots and what is colloquially known as potatoes, meaning catalysts, Orkin catalysts, and Orkin reactors.
Mhm,
Do those need to be monetized and as scarce as they are? I always ask this question. I know other people have asked this question, but I always feel like it takes a back burner when people like critique
mhm.
Warframe, right? Like when other content creators like critique Warframe, or I'm not saying that people haven't brought it up. I just want to bring it up as like I'm sure you all make a load of money off of all the monetization and all the cosmetics and everything. By the way, I just want to point out, I literally shivered as I said not
Is
cosmetics, as
is
I
it
said
like
monetization.
something
Anyways,
that you feel like
the question, the question,
is it something that you feel like
go ahead.
is it is unethical? Like it feels almost like an
The
unethical
question I
type of
want to ask is it necessary? Because it's a roadblock in people's progression if they
Mhm,
don't have enough space to like hold all of these weapons that you guys have put so much time into developing, right? Like the Comarex, I don't even own it. I've seen other people using it. It looks dope. I'm gonna get my hands on one. Reason I haven't taken mine out of the foundry is because I've run out of slots. Because slots and potatoes, mainly slots, but is a problem that unless you engage with trading for plant on the market, which not everyone does, I don't typically do it. Like that's not a problem you can just easily fix as a new player. And like I've noticed, I've taken note of Nightwave giving people catalysts and reactors and slots
mhm.
for different things. I'm like, that's cool. But I just want to bring up the question of like, is it necessary that Warframe monetizes inventory, like arsenal inventory space and uh, you know, catalysts and reactors when it already takes so much time
So I would
to level things up and put form on things? That's all I wanted to say. Like I don't, like I said, this can come down. This could come down to
yeah, like
how
like in
where
in
Warframe is earning
in a
its money,
perfect
right?
world.
Like I'm not saying that you should remove them. If you need them there to keep Warframe running, I guess okay.
Yeah,
But
like
I don't
it's
know. We don't have this information, so I'm just bringing up the question again
yeah,
in the hopes that you
it's like
listen to
in a
this, right?
perfect world.
That you've
Yeah,
been
like
listening to
like like
this.
in a perfect world, you would hope that they focus mainly on what is fashion frame, right? Like what are the things that people go like, what, this is frivolous, yes, but I love this game enough that I want to do this for the game. I want to spend money on the alternate helmets, on the sandanas, on the skins for my pets, or on like the little attachments and like skins and deluxe skins for my warframe, and then everything else is just based on the player enjoying the game, right? So like an example of that would be, then if they were to remove something like that, they could either, one, an alternative would be to just give like a couple more beginning slots for a new player and then teach them how it is that they can earn platinum by doing the training, or simply just either sort of getting rid of that, but also then propping up. Hey, look, we have a bunch of different skins for all these cool weapons that we've spent
I wasn't
time
gonna get into like nitty
and
gritty
money
examples or any
developing
of that. I just
to
wanted to
enjoy.
bring the question up while we're here making this like 2 hour long podcasty thing, you know.
Okay, okay.
And the other thing I want to bring up, which is even more like at the end of the day, for the grand scope of the game, it's meaningless, but like a really small thing that I just personally wanted to add is I understand that Vauban is going to get reworked because people have been
Mhm.
screaming for it. I am personally of the opinion that he only needs the rework because of the shift in the game, not because Vauban actually needs it, right? So in a way,
Like,
he does
like
need
it's
it,
simply
but
because of
you get
the
my
shift
point.
in.
I think
Yeah,
he's
it's
okay the
simply
way he
because of the
is.
shift in player style. That's it.
Yeah, it's the shift in like what people are attracted to based on the what kind of content you all have been pushing.
Okay.
The only thing I'm going to say is if you have to tear Vauban apart and completely rebuild him from scratch because you don't know how to address the way he functions right now, can you maintain the fact that all of Vauban's abilities are throwable sticky grenades? I'm being serious. I love
Like I
Vauban,
like my NG.
and I like the I at the time when Vauban was released, this was really unique. This was something that is a part. This is something that has been baked into Vauban's identity since he existed. Because I played Warframe before he existed, and it was really cool that you could just chuck his abilities if you had enough space. You could chuck his abilities across the map. It would take like 5 seconds for the travel time, but you could still do it. If you have to completely give him like a whole new kit, just maintain the throwable sticky grenade part. In fact, you all know how significant the sticky grenade part is. Years ago, when you made Vauban Prime, you actually made the sticky grenades look different when you're on Vauban Prime compared to regular Vauban.
Yeah, but
That's
it's
the
it's
like, and
still
that detail is so minuscule that it is
yeah.
barely it is not noticeable unless you try to look for it, but it's there. And I just hope that you don't forget about
Yeah.
that when either Scott or whoever works on Vauban's rework, right? I just hope you don't forget that that is a part of Vauban's identity. And if you have to tear the whole thing apart and like rebuild him from scratch and make him have like turrets or health stations or make his crowd control like vortex fling Bastilles around or like whatever madness you're going to come up with for Vauban's rework, just remember that that is a part of Vauban's identity, and I will personally be disappointed if it disappears
Okay.
on any one of his abilities. That's all I wanted to bring up about that. It's not
Yeah.
make or break for the game, but
Like like like
while we're
quick
here,
quick side notes.
it's the while we're here section.
And then what else?
'Cause that's all I had.
Mine
Your quick set.
mine are just I don't even know if they're minor. Crafting times are annoying, and I understand why they're there, but like it feels like they take too much time.
We may have
Like it
surpassed the point for 24 and 72-hour crafting times, I think is what you're trying to say.
yeah, like it's like these things
You can
were
still
there
make your
because
crafting times long, but they don't need to be like 72 hours long.
yeah, like hey man, do you have 3 days? Because in 3 days this thing will be available for you. And you're just like, okay, cool.
If a
3 days
Warframe takes
to
a
have my
day, that
fun.
makes more sense.
Yeah.
You know,
And then besides that, what
it's not
was it?
make or break, but you know,
Yeah, and then besides that, I think the last thing is me again thinking about like if Warframe, which is doubtful, if because paying even like a bit of a royalty to like let's say an Epic Games to use their engine,
oh, I know what
will
you're
still
about to
be a
talk
hit,
about.
right?
Yeah,
Right. So like if Warframe were to go ahead for some reason to go on to like let's say Unreal Engine and take advantage of the fact that Unreal Engine has cross-platform between now PS4, Xbox One, phone, tablet, and then PC, and every single player within all those platforms can play the same game at the same time together. Like that's a boon,
that would
right?
be
Because like
intense.
then, yeah,
And
like
I know that that this has been brought up before as something
oh
that
yeah,
is difficult due to all of the contracts with people like Nintendo and Microsoft and Sony and all of that.
yeah. So like
So it is
so,
difficult.
so, so this is why
Well,
I would imagine that if they were to, let's say, make a Warframe number trois. Is it trois? Two?
No,
Fuck it. I don't know.
duh. That's
Duh.
French.
Uh,
De trois, quatre, cinq, six, sept, huit, neuf, dix,
no, it's
etc.
actu trois. No, forget. Whatever.
I
Not
did it.
words that I don't know. If Warframe were to make, if DE were to put Warframe in a different engine and go like, hey, look, we got Warframe 2. We want a new contract. You guys enjoy our player base because you're making money off of them, just like we are. We enjoy having our partnership, and you enjoy having an engaged player base that's still using your stuff, consuming your item. We want to have crossplay, and we want to have all these people play together and enjoy themselves. I think that would be dope, right? And then, like, besides that, it's what I'm always thinking of is, because Unreal Engine is used by so many developers, I would imagine that, and this is the outsider's perspective, like of an idiot who doesn't know how this would work or how hard it would be. But I would imagine that just having the 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 litany of other developers that have worked on the engine and being able to go like, hey man, I'm trying to work on this, and you go to the forums, like, anyone got a solution for this that I could use? I would imagine like we would get fixes for things and new features in the game a lot more frequently. Like, I still remember I saw a video of a guy building a level in Unreal Engine within like 3 hours. And from start to finish, like, if you see it at the beginning, you're like, oh, it's a flat place. And then this dude just started putting things in place. He put in dirt, he put in grass, like he put in like light poles, and he
Start
put in a
dumping
rail car.
assets into the level
Just
and
started dumping
terraforming it.
assets into the level. Yeah, like it just like made it a lived in environment that looks similar to like The Last of Us. And I just went, holy crap, right? And it just made me go, I wonder if this would be something that DE would benefit from. Yeah, they take a bit of a hit when it comes to how much money they bring in, but then you also have improvements being added to the game at a much brisker pace, right? You also have the community all playing together. You have updates just going live, right? Like, look at the the rate at which something like what's the name of the freaking that battle royale on that Epic owns? Jesus Christ, I forgot the name. Fortnite. Look at the rate at which Fortnite updates. It's crazy, right? And they keep adding new things, and I'm just like, okay, this is cool. I want to see what DE, being what the team that they are, could do within the engine power of Unreal. Like, I'm curious, but of course, if they don't, it's like understandable also. Um,
Yeah.
anything else we want to address before we wrap up?
I think we've addressed enough, and we haven't made it to 2 hours yet, which is good for our listeners. Save
Uh,
them some time, you know? I want to end it with saying, like, well, I feel like we covered everything that we wanted to talk about enough.
mhm.
If for any reason anyone wants to continue the conversation and get more specific examples or contexts, context, I was thinking of similar both of those words at the same time. If anyone's looking for more context or anything, I'm sure you can figure out how to contact us if you're
I mean, I'm
interested.
gonna
I
upload.
guess
Yeah,
is
like,
that
I'm gonna
reasonable to
upload
say?
this thing to YouTube, and I'll attach my Twitter,
You're gonna throw it at
and
Steve.
I'm gonna just like chuck. I'm no, wait. Let me use the
This is
Tide
a
Pod.
big
Oh, wait, hold
catapult,
on, hold on,
so
hold
you're
on.
gonna need
Let, 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 let me use the Tide Pod generation's words.
to.
I'm gonna yode it towards Steve,
Oh boy.
like a burrito, just like a hefty Mexican made burrito, and it's just be like, all right, Steve, te tengo un regalo. Yeah. And yeah, that's it. Uh,
If you wanna come back to us for some reason, talk to Lewis.
yeah.
Talk to Lewis. He's on Twitter. I'm not. So That's that.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure we're both open to talking with people. That would be cool.
Yeah,
But
it'd be
we
interesting.
understand that TennoCon is tomorrow, and after tomorrow, you're either gonna be uh, relaxing for a moment before you go back into the fray, or you're just gonna be going back in the fray after TennoCon. So
Yeah. It'll be
it's all up to
it'll
you.
be in
We're not expecting
yeah,
anything.
it'll be interesting if like every single thing we've addressed is just taken care of
I would
on TennoCon.
honestly
It's like
feel like some psychic was listening in on us right now and just relayed it to DE in a past timeline. Like that'd be weird.
just like the world being aware enough that we're doing this thing, and then it happens. You're just like, oh well, oh,
That's
we
some
made a video,
fate shenanigans right there.
an attempt was made. We thought we did something cool. Turns out DE is just like flexing, and they're just like, yeah, bro,
We
we
knew
got
this was
this.
coming. We were ready.
Seven years
We were
at this,
ready when the
homie.
Fire Nation attacked.
They're just like, yo, like, what did you think we were doing for 7 years? Like, not paying attention? We had this, bro. I almost wish I had like a JoJo reference just because that's
Is
all I'm
that a
seeing for the web right
JoJo reference?
now. Anyways, that's it. We can wrap it up. Thank you
Yeah.
for
Thank you
listening
for
to the
listening.
rambling.
If you did,
Yeah, thank you for listening to the rambling of two morons.
yeah,
To dorkly morons trying to do something positive or slightly cool. And
yeah,
I'm excited for tomorrow.
yeah.
That's
I'm
it.
excited for
Ciao.
TennoCon. Good luck on your journey, DE. We appreciate you.
Yeah. Take care. Bye.